Welcome to Women and Water. Even the words have a wonderful symbiosis. In fact, they both begin with W. They both contain two syllables, women and water. And of course, water is the source of all life, as are women. So it's no wonder we all feel so connected to H2O. And in mythology, don't forget, we were always connected. Venus, the goddess of beauty, was known as the water carrier. Aphrodite was the goddess of the sea. And in literature, of course, we had Ophelia, who drowns in water. And our very own Saint Bridget, which is very appropriate for this week, was once said to have turned water into beer. So in good company there. And of course, when there's a scarcity of water, women often bear the brunt for cooking, hygiene, childbirth, and even life itself. So today we're looking at the connection between women and water and why we are drawn to it in such a fundamental way. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Siobhán Cronin. I'm the editor of the Southern Star, and I also present a podcast called From A to C about sea swimming. So we've been very nicely invited by Marguerite and Creative Bandon to record this for the podcast for the November edition. So thank you very much, Marguerite, for the invite. And we are joined by some fantastic women. And unfortunately, Nuala is just delayed, but she's going to make a grand entrance, as Nuala Moore always does, shortly. But I will still give her a little intro because I don't want to change things up when she arrives. So just to say that Nuala is an author, she's an extreme swimmer, and she's a businesswoman. And we're also joined then by Durrus-based yoga teacher and wild swimming enthusiast and children's swimming coach Dominique Corcoran, and educator and sea enthusiast Katie McShane, who's the founder of Wise Water, which is based in Kinsale. And just a little bit more information on these lovely women. So being from Dingle, Nuala Moore has had a relationship with the sea since she was a child, and she swam around the coast of Ireland in a relay swim. She's done a solo swim across Lake Zurich, and she was the first swimmer in the world to complete the treacherous meeting of the oceans at Cape Horn. So she really is one of our great, under-recognised, I think, swimmers in this country, athletes in fact. She holds 2 Guinness World Records for extreme cold water swimming, but during the day you can often catch her behind the counter of the Strawberry Beds linen shop in Dingle, which is well worth a trip because I interviewed her there a few months ago and it's a gorgeous little space. Dominique Corcoran is a swimming coach and a yoga teacher, and she lives in Durrus, where she swims regularly with a group of local women called the Chili Dippers. She can never recall a time before she swam. And having lived in London for a time, Dominique swam in the Serpentine in London's Hyde Park, in the Ladies' Pond in Hampstead Heath, and she's also taken part in the Great North Swim in Lake Windermere, the Great Scottish Swim in Loch Lomond, and since returning to live in West Cork in 2020, she has undertaken swims in Killary Fjord, the River Shannon, Union Hall and more. And Dominique believes that our love of the sea may be intrinsically linked to our time in the womb when surrounded by amniotic fluid. So it's our very first swim, so to speak. Katie McShane is a passionate advocate for water and an environmental educator. She describes herself as a sea-splashing social scientist. A great tongue twister there. Delving into the social and cultural aspects of water. And Katie has made it her life's mission to educate, celebrate, and raise awareness about the importance of water conservation and protection. And my own journey to the sea came about when I had a back operation in 2001 and I was told to take up sea swimming, and my surgeon said you might get 10 good years out of your back if you start swimming, and I haven't looked back literally, and I'm still swimming and I haven't had any more operations, so fingers crossed. I'm the daughter of 2 coastal natives, although I was brought up in Cork City. My mother's from Mountain Head, my father's from Cove, so I really believe that somewhere in my DNA there is the water, and that's why I'm drawn to it. So we're going to delve a little deeper, if you pardon the pun, into all things women and water. And is it nurture or is it nature? Now, the first question I always ask everyone on the podcast is, what are your first memories of the water? So I'm going to ask maybe Katie first to jump in on that.
Thank you. It's such a great question, because the first one I think I shared with you was the first time I began to swim. So I grew up by swimming in the River Lee, and my dad, when I was 6, just threw me into the river and said, swim, you know, and I just trashed about the place. And I found that I could tread the water, I could do the doggy paddle, and I found floating and, you know, that ease suddenly in the water. And it was where I really found through the years, my freedom and that ecstasy in my body, like being one with the river. And at that time, the River Lee was so clean, like it's quite close to the source. So you could see like the sparkling stones at the bottom of the river, which is unfortunately not the way it is now.
But you had 2 bad experiences with water, did you?
Yes, well, I don't really remember the first. I've nearly drowned twice. But, you know, this question actually did, like in the last few days, I remembered, like it's in my cells, like this memory of my first time meeting the ocean. And what's amazing is that I actually had a similar experience with my daughter when she first met the ocean. And it was kind of almost before I had words for, you know, for what was happening, you know, and I can just remember the vastness of the sea and the sky, you know, how huge it was and how engulfing the sound, you know, just completely filled me. And that shifting sand and getting completely overwhelmed and dizzy and falling into the water, you know, and the same thing happened then to my daughter. And I was like, how can you be crying? This is amazing, it's at the sea, you know. But it's just the extraordinary power of being in that expansive space, you know. So it's kind of like that memory bubbled up in me, which I hadn't thought about actually, and I hadn't made that correlation with my own daughter, that's why she was overwhelmed when she first met the ocean. It's very powerful. So,
Dominique?
Yeah, so this was a really, it was an interesting question to reflect on. And, you know, as you said when you were introducing me, I really don't remember a time not being able to swim, and I don't particularly remember learning to swim. But what did pop up for me the other day was my first actual memory of any memory at all was I was 2 years old and I accidentally touched an electric fence. And so the memory I have isn't so much actually of touching the fence, it's of my dad holding my hand under cold running water to soothe it. So I think that's, you know, and I think that I may realise that's nothing to do with, you know, with swimming, but I think it's, that for me is partially where, yeah, that kind of the whole concept of being held by water and being comforted and how we, you know, use water for healing. And then it's just, you know, interestingly, I think how you see your kind of relationship with swimming in different places where you swim change over your life. So when my mum comes from coal mining country in Wales, but she lived halfway up a mountain and there was a beautiful brook that ran down there. So we always used to paddle in the brook when we were small, when we visited her family there. And I grew up in lots of different places because my dad travelled around a lot for his job. So we actually lived in cities a lot, and I spent most of my life swimming in swimming pools. And particularly when we lived in the US when I was small, we had really hot summers, and the only thing you could do was just spend the day at the town pool. But I feel like now, interestingly, I'm much more living by the sea, swimming in the sea rather than in the pool. So it's just nice to see that kind of evolution of how you know that changes.
So thank you, ladies. I know myself, and she's not here, that Nuala, in her book Limitless, which I'll give a plug because she's not here to plug it herself, fantastic book, that she talks about being thrown off her father's boat in Dingle, fishing boat, and just being told swim to shore, and she did. And then after that she started trying to compete with her brothers and outdo them, and by God has she outdone them in her swimming, in her swimming achievements. So on behalf of Nuala, that's her memory. I think she would have added in. So why do you think, Katie, that we are so connected as women to water and drawn to it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, with myself and Elaine, we set up Wise Water to share really the profound connections that we have with water, like in our bodies, in our relationships with each other and the living world around us. You know, and that's with young people, it's with all people. So I think for women, we definitely have a very intimate connection, and but really, I mean, just that fundamental that all of us are in this incredible water environment all the time, interacting with water, that, you know, and so much so that we don't even consider it. And even like every single product, everything in this room, everything is made with the help of water, you know, and that's something that we really, you know, it's why we're so passionate about bringing this to young people and to all people, you know, to actually awaken that realization and that recognition that we have this profound connection through everything around us.
And the importance of cherishing it and conserving it.
Exactly, because it's like, because we're so used to it, we use it, it's like we're using it rather than being in relationship with it. You know, it's like, you know, it's to become aware. The more we become aware of it, the more that we can protect and cherish it, you know, and that's what we're seeing in so many different ways. And, you know, even like if we look at how the feminine in this world, you know, that, you know, we're in a very masculine dominated world and very action orientated, you know, it's kind of has disregarded all of these more receptive, more gentle, more nurturing and supportive aspects of life, which is what water is. You know, water is just infinitely generous. So it's like there's a very strong relationship with the feminine nature and water and how it behaves. And it's all down to connection. You know, it's just such a beautiful thing to have a conversation about. We can all relate to it in different ways and add to it. But yeah, we're connected emotionally, we're connected, like our eyes are 98% water, so we're seeing the world through a watery lens. Our brains are 85% water, you know, and even like on a neuron, like we're wired to connect through water to each other. You know, the neurons are receiving and releasing water in how they form connections, you know, so even on that level, you know, it's like our body instantly communicates through the water in our bodies, you know, and we're interacting with each other and feeling, because we're receptive, water is infinitely receptive, you know, all of these different things that water can teach us about how we're so intimately connected. It's really exciting.
And I know both of you are, and I mentioned it earlier about the amniotic fluid in the womb, and I know both of you are quite interested in that connection. And I think you mentioned to me before that the makeup of the amniotic fluid is similar.
It is.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's what Dominique mentioned earlier as well. You know, our first experience is swimming in our own personal ocean in our mothers. You know, and it is incredible that the amniotic fluid is the same mineral and content and salt content, not as salty as the ocean. And there's many different correlations. I mean, indigenous cultures talk about the Great Mother, you know, that's the great source of the ocean. And, you know, it's like even the fact that theories of evolution are coming to the recognition that it's from the ocean that life kind of originated. You know, so there's this, and even I mean, I find that a lot of people that I swim with will run into the ocean saying, oh, the mother, you know, it's like a sense of surrender into something that holds us and nurtures us. You know, it's an amazing relationship to have.
And I know, Dominic, you're interested in that element too, and I know as a mother of a young girl, you feel very connected to that element of life-giving and
yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like it's a kind of it's a sort of really obvious realization that I've kind of come to in the last 5 or 6 years, since my daughter was born. That, you know, I feel like how did, you know, I've been a swimmer all my life, how did I not make this connection sooner? But I mean, one of the sort of images that you think about every film where there's a baby born, they come out into this big, bright, sort of angry world screaming because actually they've been floating around somewhere really warm and dark and cozy. So, you know, there's no surprises then that being in this huge, big space is kind of quite, frightening, I suppose. But I think as well what's interesting too about it is I teach mostly children to swim, and they range between the ages of 5 and 12, and particularly with the youngest swimmers who start at about, say, 4 or 5 years old. I mean, some of them, children love to play in water, and mostly they are really excited to come and learn how to swim, but some are really afraid of the water. And so, those kind of connections I started to make, just because I was thinking, well, how can I kind of make these children sort of feel more comfortable with the water, essentially. And I was like, well, you know what, you spent, before you even came out into the world, all of this time in Mummy's tummy in water. So actually floating is the most natural thing. You could float before you could talk or walk or, do anything else. And, as you said, things about the percentage of water in your body, at least 50% of your whole body is made up of water. So those are the kind of things you try and sort of talk to them about, to think about creating that kind of, taking away that fear element, maybe. Yeah.
And one thing we talked about when we were talking before today was how the pandemic brought a lot of people to water, and women in particular. And the interesting thing is that we stayed with it afterwards. And so maybe a little bit of the, the comfort, the protection. Can you speak to that a little bit, Katie, of why you think that was such a turning point, I suppose, in sea swimming?
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? There's so many different female sea swimming groups. Because I was like I was actually not daily until the pandemic, a sea swimmer. And during the pandemic, I think the first wave, and I hear that this resonates with quite a few people, the first wave was actually not so bad. There was a little bit of okay, let's assess what's going on. But it was in the second wave that I actually, for the first time, I started to experience panic attacks, which, and extreme anxiety. And it became, jumping into sea was actually the only thing that I could do that would calm me and make me feel everything's okay. It's just it was, definitely that place of safety. And it was really amazing as well to see, something that that I became aware of, to mention now, is that during the pandemic, it became highlighted that women are, having to carry so much of the love labor as well. We always do generally, but not just that, that we're having to juggle so many aspects in our life because we're so bloody capable. It's kind of the thing that sometimes holds us back is that we're too capable. We see what needs to be done and we do it. So that became, a lot of research came out about that, that women are just doing so much in our modern lives, as well as furthering our own career. And that jumping into the sea is instant. It gives us, we don't have a huge amount of time for self-care. That's where you get an instant reset, and that time to go into the larger picture. Well, that was definitely what I found as well.
But there is a science in that, and I know we've both spoken about our poor friend here. My other great book that I go to is Wallace Nichols' Blue Mind. He's the man who basically invented the phrase the blue mind, but he was a research scientist, a marine biologist, and unfortunately passed away a few months ago at a very young age. But there is a science behind why we get such comfort from the water. And it goes back to the neurons you mentioned earlier, I think, does it?
Exactly. Yeah, Lane and I, this is a huge part of what we bring. It's one of the tools that we bring, especially to young people, but it's for all of us. What Wallace J. Nichols really brought together is all of the research and all of the evidence that shows really what we all know, that when we're by the ocean or by water, that we feel better, but he just put it in such brilliant terms and made it so it's like a tool for self-awareness. So he calls Blue Mind that calm, open, aware space that being around water, they can actually show that they've shown through scans and through different trials that that's what water does for us. And then the red mind is where we're operating from, unfortunately, a lot in our modern lives, and it's that place of stress and the overwhelm and the busyness and the doing. So it's and then when we're in that place too much, it becomes grey, the grey mind, which is where we're in burnout. So he kind of separated them in these brilliant ways, so it's a tangible tool for self-awareness, which is great to translate to young people. They really get that, and it's really fabulous way for us to
and the other thing I loved in the book was that the research has shown that you don't have to swim, you don't have to even dip. If you're in the Midlands and you can't get to water, you can turn on the tap. You can have a water feature in your house. You can turn on the shower. Like every level basically has some benefit, and of course immersion is the ultimate then. But just to get back to the pandemic, Dominique, you found great solace in water then, I think.
I just to pick up briefly on what Katie was just saying. So one of the kind of basic sort of scientific pieces of it is negative ions, essentially. So and I think it's that whole piece about modern life and is a good way to kind of explain that, in the sense that and it sort of sounds backwards, but essentially almost everything in this room, like telephones, the computer, the lights, they're all producing positive ions, which are one of the things that kind of drag us down a little bit, basically. Whereas negative ions are responsible for kind of lifting your mood. So, for example, the reason people use Himalayan salt lamps, they release negative ions. That feeling, I don't know if you ever notice after a heavy rainfall, there's this kind of sense of calm, and that is negative ions, and they're also produced by the sea. So that's kind of part of the scientific piece that's sort of responsible for that sense of well-being. And I think as well, the whole sort of piece about the women coming to the sea more, perhaps during the pandemic, it was interesting for me because I was living in London during the first, most of it actually, and all the pools were closed and I couldn't go anywhere to swim because we only had something like, I think it was maybe a bit longer distance in England than in Ireland, maybe it was 5 kilometres, but the only thing I could find was walking along the Thames and looking at it, which was nice. And then there was a park that had a stream in it, so I used to walk in the stream. But I know certainly from the swimming group that I'm part of now over on Sheep's Head, that was everyone's huge solace, and I think we still find that now. And there's a big piece of Katie was talking about that, the kind of caring and love work, and we like to call it, I guess, maybe the emotional load that women tend to carry for their families and their friends. There's I'm going to plug this book actually that I have here.
We're great at plugging books today.
It's
a pity they're not on sale.
Book nerds as well as being swimmers. The two things I find tend to go together. But this is a super interesting book called Swell, by a lady called Jenny Landreth, and she's a swimmer. She covers lots of different things in here. Some of it is about the science, but also really interesting stuff about the history around swimming, particularly for women, how it was a kind of piece about freedom. The suffragettes, they swam in the Serpentine, and that was all literally about freedom and the body and space for women. And I think that's one of the things that I really noticed around that thing about the pandemic and the emotional load piece, in that you're when you're swimming in the water, you're not confined. You decide where you're going to float, what you're going to swim, what distance you're going to do. There's something fascinating too about body image, in the sense that I think we probably would all agree women's bodies and the way they dress and move are so incredibly fraught, politically, and you don't really need anything very fancy to swim. You can wear a really fancy swimsuit or a really not fancy one,
or no swimsuit.
Yes, which is what we do when we swim for the full moon, depending on how bright it is, obviously. I think that applies not just to women, to everybody. But there's one of the brilliant things about swimming, I think, in general. There are really low barriers to entry, and it's not a classist sport. You don't have to have fancy gear to swim. And there is also, I think, amongst women who swim in particular, there's a kind of appreciation for the body, as opposed to that kind of negative piece about, and it's a very non-competitive space, you know, particularly if I compare it to, say, because I also teach yoga. I mean, I was sort of almost put off becoming a yoga teacher because I thought, well, I'm not skinny in a bikini, and you know, I don't have that kind of Instagram friendly sort of profile. But for some reason, there's something really fascinating about how that really does not affect swimming nearly as much, I don't think, particularly sea swimming.
I was going to actually ask you about that because I know this, you can hold on to the mic, because I know you know a little bit about this as well, that we're better designed as women for swimming, which is really fascinating, than men or teenagers. So delve into that one.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. So it's all about fat, basically, essentially. Yes, but it's celebrating that, and actually Nuala has been part of some really interesting research, science on that. So she'll definitely have more to say on it. But basically, women have a higher percentage of body fat than men, and so we float better. Bottom line, that is scientific fact. The other thing about it is it's where the fat is distributed. So it tends to particularly be around your hips and your thighs. We probably would all, you know, and then of course we have boobs. And
what about our stomachs, please?
Well, just that whole part of the body. And I mean, I find it when you particularly teaching kids how to swim, you really notice, particularly in skinny adolescent boys, bless them, their legs and tummies just sink so much. They actually need to build their core strength much more to swim on their backs and to float on their backs than girls do. So that there is that kind of the actual sort of fact piece around that. But I think as well, one of the things that I've always reflected on about, just because as I said, I've been a swimmer all my life, I think there's something about swimming for me that even if you leave it go for a couple of years, you can come back to it and build up your stamina and endurance really quickly. So it's kind of it's not a dispiriting thing to do in that sense, you know, whereas sometimes if you haven't been to the gym for ages, if you're into that kind of thing, it can be sort of terrifying because it's really hard work. And there's some interesting pieces actually around the research that's been done on women. I think one of the things that brings women to swimming too is that endurance thing. So like anecdotally, I always used to find it funny when I do pool swims, you know, I rarely swim less than 2 kilometers at a time, and you get these men who are rah, 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 and they do about 10 lengths, and I'm like, yeah, okay, you're not going to be here for an hour. Whereas I might be slower than you, but I'll be here much longer. And there's some really interesting research on channel swims for women versus men, and there was another piece done in the US on the swim around Manhattan Island. So the details are in the book, but essentially women were 12 to 14% faster than men, the fastest women, in this Manhattan Island swim. And so essentially the pace differential is over distance. So overall in long distance swimming, women are faster. And that's the same for channel swims. So there's less women who've swum the channel, but overall the fastest women were faster than the men. And I really think that it's something to do with spirit as well. It's just not giving up, essentially. So,
Katie, what I wanted to ask you about next was about, and we touched on it a little bit there, the social aspect of swimming and women. Yeah. And in the pandemic, that was a big part of it, that you got to meet people because you were in water and you could meet people in water.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big reason for why there are so many swim groups, it's true. You know, and actually Elaine set up a brilliant full moon swim. You're just reminding me there with the naked swimming. When you can go, like, you know, but it was amazing, you know, when we came together, like on those full moons, and like that's the thing, is that it's when it's really wintry and wild and the rain is sideways and it's absolutely Baltic, you know, and you're like, no, we're not going to do it. But then you come together, you know, and the conversations that you have, you know, that's the thing, when you come together in those situations, you know, you're doing something that's quite brave, whether it's nighttime, you know, or during the day as well, sometimes when it's really, really cold. You know, it's like you're there for a purpose, you know, and you're conversations are more purpose-filled. You know, you share things that need to be shared, you know. So, and that's the thing, is like we would go running into that ocean, like whooping and hollering and just releasing, like that sense of freedom, you know, because the ocean can hold it all, you know, and but also that we're holding each other, you know, and that amazing support, you know, and I think that women really have that. We're very blessed in that way. We might have bigger challenges than men, but we have like bigger, stronger support networks because we're women, you know. So I think that's you know, it's a blessing, really.
And why do you think, though, that men don't seem to, like, we have men's sheds and they were ahead of the women's sheds, and they do like to gather in groups, but we don't really see groups of men swimming that much now. A little bit at Lough-Ine, I've seen a few, but you go down there at 7 a.m. in the morning and it's always 5 or 6 women, and very rarely will you see men, and if you do, they're in ones and twos. Like, do we know any research into that?
I mean, you know, what comes to mind and body is the power of our wombs, you know. There's, you know, it's such a mystery still. There is so little of our modern medicine is based on the feminine body, you know. So, you know, that is one reason as well why it's such medicine for women to be with the waters. You know, it's like our hormone complexity, and the power and the connectivity within our womb with each other. You know, the way that we can have synchronized menstrual cycles, and then we have these ties. Like, it's like there's all of these amazing relationships and connections with the female body and the water around us that, you know, it's just not explored enough yet in medicine.
There's a whole.
So,
and here is our great guest of the evening. Well done. Nuala, I was thinking if you had swam, you'd have probably got here a lot faster.
Yeah. This is why I don't live in Dublin.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. There were a few subjects that we were talking about there, and we were missing your presence for them. And I know you're very interested in this topic, so I want to go back to it. Why during the pandemic women took to the water in their droves? And you're still very, I know you want to ask the audience later, but why do you think?
You know what?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky.
For me, one of the
biggest
issues as regards the water and why people go there, whenever I find life is a little bit overwhelming, I would go into the sea to find balance. And this isn't anything technical or anything bizarre, but you know, when you go into the sea, when you're breathing, when you're swimming, if you can hear your breathing, you can hear the effort. It's like if you go jogging, or sometimes, I mean, I think I'm a fabulous runner until I'm like, and it's one of those things in life, when you can hear the breathing, you can hear the effort. When you hear your bubbles, you can hear the balance.
Okay.
So I would often go into the sea and go beyond my depth, just a foot or whatever, and you sit there. And I'm a big fan of finding out who you are in the water, finding out your balance, finding out where your position is.
Like treading water, you mean?
No, just sit there. Just literally go into a vertical position. You should
Below?
always know. Just stand there in a vertical position, deeper than your body, and find out where you sit. You should always know what your buoyancy is. So, like, some people use an awful lot of energy just to stay up, whereas my position is you should be able to stay up in a vertical position and not sink. So you should always be trying to manage your breath in that position. In the unlikely event of an incident, to be the first point of contact is if you raise your hand and you're sinking, you're really now not contributing
in trouble.
to the whole rescue system. So, you know, for me, I would go in, and it takes a little bit to find your balance, and your balance should be in a position, like, as females we have a high percentage of body fat, and that's just hollow legs, we're born with them, and but that's the truth, yeah, and then if you look at the body position of a female in the water, it's much higher than a male, and that's why a majority of drownings happen with males in fresh water because of the vertical drop. But when here's this now. What was the question? I remember. This is what happens, yeah. So what I was getting getting at is, for me, I think there was so much going on with COVID. There was so much, I suppose, interference in our mind. There was so much movement. But the one thing we had was this freedom of space. And also, there's so much evidence that if you increase your immune system, you really develop this pushback against disease and stuff like that. Like, such a small percentage of viruses exist in the cold. So you've all those variables there, and I think innately we will go to that which protects us. So, 20 years have passed, and I've watched people, come back to the water. I suppose swimming and training for the last 15, 20, 30 years, and the beaches are empty. But in the last 10 years, there's laughter, there's movement. It's stunning to see movement of people in and around the water. But I think, personally speaking, one of the things that gravitates females to the water, and this is just my own opinion, is that there's no competition in there. Nobody's lining up against, when you're on the road walking. I mean, I think I'm a fast runner until somebody speed walks past me. And I actually have a t-shirt that says, I may not look fast, but inside I'm racing. And I made that for myself because I think I'm fast. So, like, when you go into the sea, interestingly enough, and I'm not sure if you touched on the weight category thing.
A little bit.
Yeah, I can follow on that in a few minutes. My ladies now.
They're delighted with you.
But interestingly enough, when you look at the situation in life, like we have this innate thing to compare and contrast. And so-and-so's faster than me, and I really should be faster than them, but technically I should be as good as them. But nobody knows what you woke up with this morning, nobody knows what you went to bed with last night, nobody knows the stresses, so your starting point is different. When you go into the sea, the fastest swimmers can often have to get out first because they have the less body fat. And therefore, when you have a little bit more body fat and a little bit less stress, you can stay in longer. And there is this sense of, like, I'm as good as anybody else in here, that you may not feel in a vertical position. And you can breathe and you can float. You don't have to be sprinting, you can just be. So it's an interesting thing, when I look at people in the water now, people say, I'm going for a swim. Me 15 years ago would have said, not sure that's what you call it.
Okay.
However, me now saying, great, we do coffee after.
Yeah.
So I think there's a huge difference in who we are as people. There's a cleansing feel to it, there's a balance feel to it, there's a breathing feel to it, there's a camaraderie feel to it.
But would it have happened without COVID?
Without a doubt,
Yeah? Why? We were just ready? We were ready for it?
I don't know if we were ready for it. I think we were always ready for it. I mean, I don't know why people were on the sofas for 20 years. But seriously, like, people said, oh God, I discovered the water, but we were alive a long time. So I feel a lot of it is the fact that, everything is cyclical. There was a time where people were running marathons, doing 10Ks. And as you get older, your body gets weaker. Your joints get sore, suddenly you're in physio, and but I mean, they're saying you need to go in, look, it's about the body, it's about the cycle of life. And for me personally, it's a balancing factor. Like, when my mind is racing, I would always say, you go into the water with like 1,000 things on your mind, you just come out cold. But that's it. And when you look at that situation, when you come out cold, you reset. And then on the other side of it, there's so many benefits. If you can't breathe, you can't swim. So it takes your breathing down. And
the other thing we wanted to mention, and we did a little bit about the whole the body fat thing, and I know that you wanted to talk about the research in UCD, was it? And you said that you were the poster girl for brown fat or something.
No. In 2000.
For them anyway.
Not at all. In 2013, in 2010 and 2013, we swam around Ireland. In 2006, 18 years ago. And when we swam around Ireland, it was obviously 1,330 kilometres, and there was 5 main swimmers. But each one of us swam probably 4 to 6 hours every single day for a period of 2 months, and then all the training. But we gained 2 stone. I was horrified. And I always kind of thought, like, as I was getting fat, I was like, are you kidding me? And I always, you went into all of these things, and it never dawned on me why our bodies would gain fat. But it didn't matter. So then I went on and I did the ice, and I did all of these other things. And then in 2013, I was part of the team. We swam from Russia to America across the Bering Strait. And I had all these amazing marathon swims, swam 12 hours across Lake Zurich. And then I got a call from Professor Luke O'Neill in the Science Gallery in 2014. Would I be the poster girl for the Fat Lab? And I said, are you kidding me? I was like, are you kidding me? And I thought that was really weird. And I thought, why would you possibly say that?
Did you use those words, Nuala?
Yeah.
Oh my God,
It was called
that's
Fat
Luke
Lab.
O'Neill.
It was called Fat Lab, yeah. And the thing was that if you go back to Operation Transformation, which I did put in an application for because I wanted to disprove their theories, but I didn't get accepted because I was too fit. And it was so funny, you know. And if you go back on what it's all about, Operation Transformation, at the time the focus was fat, but actually the focus should be sugar. And now that has moved. And what they were doing in the Science Gallery was looking at the difference between the impact of sugar on our body and the impact of fat. And we're born with brown fat. We're born, it translates to white, and then the exposure to the gold recreates brown. And the interesting thing was that we had gained 2 stone swimming that distance around Ireland. And not that we had gained, and we and I both gained weight, but the boys did. And it was fascinating, but where we had gained it was in our arms, our torsos, our backs, our necks. And if you look at the Inuits, the Eskimos, and those people who are exposed to cold, their body shape is different. And then people who are exposed to heat, they're much elongated. You know, the polar bears, the seals versus the giraffes, and it's a different body type. So, you know, I mean, obviously the day I meet God, we'll be doing coffee. This is quite unfair. But that's it. And it's your body's way of protecting its organs. So that Science Gallery was very much about, I got my test for free and I agreed to be the poster girl for the Fat Lab. But I was a live exhibition. They had Kevin Thornton marinating pig's heads in crubine, Sheridan's cheese, making body fat out of soap, out body fat. And all these experiments. It was over 6 months, and then there was me. But you know, my thing is you don't have to be thin to be fit, and it's not about that. And all my tests proved the power, the cardiovascular, the fitness, but also the fact that the visceral fat around my organ was normal.
But can I just go back to why you gained weight on the swim around Ireland? So you would imagine you'd be losing a lot of calories in cold water. So how just talk to me through that.
Life, you know, at the end of the day, like we didn't see a pizza, a biscuit, a bun, we saw nothing. It's 2006, we didn't have a nutritionist, and you're pumping 4 to 6 hours out of your body every single day in those extreme environments. You have your breakfast in the morning, you know, you might have ham sandwiches, we didn't have all this nutrition. And like, I mean, you know, you're there, you're swimming.
You were eating sugar, basically. You were taking in sugar, were you?
No, you weren't.
No.
See, this is it. You're taking in nothing. You're taking in like cups of tea and sugar and maybe barbecue and sandwiches, but you're swimming. Like we would get up in the morning, and the Cork coast goes on forever, by the way.
Luckily for some of us.
Oh, for God's sake. We started, say the south coast was the hardest. We came down the east coast really quickly, 18-minute miles, 20-minute miles, turned Tusker. And then the tides run north-south and we're going west, so our miles then became 50-minute miles. And you're getting weaker and your body's getting more tired. But ultimately, at that point, you were further out from shore. We were 14 miles off the south coast here because the water's much cleaner. There's less pull and show into the waves. But then at that point, you're also having to add about 4 more hours to your day. And in doing that, now if you're out there longer, so you're not eating, but you're cold. And when you're cold, your body doesn't metabolize the calories like you would in the heat. You're not sweating. So therefore, your body's protecting itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and then like the cold, I mean, I have no idea the physiological responses to it, but it didn't. I mean, it's not like we lied. You know, no, your body doesn't lie. And if you look at stress situation, your body packs on fat to protect itself against these conditions. Look at our parents, our grandparents, it's not like they got up and went to McDonald's. You know, they didn't have burgers and chips and all of that. So it's all of that commercial product. So I don't know, I mean, we're all predisposed to who we are as people. So yeah, but I mean, my fitness is my priority. And just a very quick one, I had the map on my shop window for many years because I needed to see people's opinions of me and how to validate who I was, and I struggled with all that thing afterwards. And obviously, I was on the front page of the Irish Times and all these newspapers in my swimming town, which isn't easy. But I always saw brilliance. I always had power and strength. This group had come up to the window of the shop and they were looking at the picture, and all I heard was the girls are really fat, aren't they? And I jumped out over the counter, ran out and said, "Oh, what do you mean I'm fat?" and one of the girls looked and said, "Oh, no. I said, "Did you not think I was fabulous?" Why would you have seen that? And there was 5 of them there, and they were saying, "Oh no, we didn't mean that." And I said, "But," and they said, "Well, we don't know how you did this." And I said, "You don't have to know. I'll tell you." Tell you what. And by the time we got to day 56, they would never call anyone back again. So it doesn't matter who we are; it's being happy with the body we have.
Okay. Okay, I will come back to you, but I'll give you a break next. You must be exhausted. You must have burned a few calories there. But it does touch on this a little bit, and it's about the mental health benefits, right? And I know Dominique wanted to talk a little bit about that and how the water has helped you in struggles down the years.
Yeah. So, I mean, this you could talk about this all day, and there's some really fascinating new research coming out all the time about the specific impact of cold water in particular on your brain. So at a basic level, exposure to cold water doesn't have to be swimming, it could also be a cold shower, but it basically gives you a massive hit of endorphins. And the more you do it, it creates neuroplasticity, so that the more you go into cold water, the more benefit you get from it, and the more you want it. So I mean, when you say when people who swim in the sea all year round say it's like a drug, it essentially really is basically like a drug.
And when the cold shower thing, so this became a really big trend there in the last few years about turn the shower down to cold for a minute before you get out, which I've never been able to do, and I'll go into Lough-Ine and my dogs in November, but don't ask me to have a cold shower.
And I'm really with you on that. It's an odd one in the sense that I find that really difficult. I don't know, is it because we start with the hot, or is it there's something about the association of, but I was reflecting the other day on how I actually haven't swam that much in the sea during the summer, and this is going to sound bonkers, but it's almost too warm. And I think that I realised that what I really love about the winter swimming is that the shock, the kind of sense of achievement that you feel with having actually done it and survived, and then it's the after effect for the rest of the day. I tend to swim in the morning, and that for me it sets me up for the day. But I think coming back a bit to what we were talking about in terms of the pandemic, and two things that I really wanted to pick up on from both of you. So just the word balance. I think for women in particular, and everyone is different. Some people love to swim as part of a community, and some people love to swim on their own. I think one of the brilliant things about sea swimming in particular is that it's kind of that there's that yin and yang about it in a way that it offers you this kind of open space to swim completely on your own, and that solace when you need it, but you can also go with a group and make the point of doing that swim together and sort of having the chats, and I think particularly now that I live in West Cork, and I'm quite rural by the sea where I am, in the winter when the days are shorter and there's a lot to, you might not really talk to if you don't work in an office, for example, if you're not going, I find that some weeks might go by, and if I don't sort of go for my group swim, and that might be one of the only interactions I have with people beyond my sort of immediate family. So I think some people can really crave that. But even beyond the sea swimming, I've been a swimmer all my life, and one of the things that I really found, and this comes back to how long you spend in the water. I think the reason I go for really long swims is because that's for me is meditation. I'm really not great at sitting down and emptying my mind of thought, just in a, even though I teach yoga, which is kind of ironic, but, even at about, I think, age sort of 12, I noticed that I would go into the pool and I'd swim, however, it would always be at least 50 to 100 lengths. And I'd get out and I'd be like, I just didn't think about anything at all. Like I'd have this sense that my brain was empty. And I've had, my fair share of mental health challenges with sort of depression and anxiety, and I'm a little bit OCD. So I have a literal sort of constant chatter in my brain a lot of the time, and the water swimming, whether it's in the sea or in the pool, is just, that's my kind of state of flow and my meditation. And I think that's common. I've heard a lot of women swimmers talk about that sort of sense of swimming as being kind of a
calming.
Yeah.
And Katie, just kind of slightly adjacent to that, you deal a lot with students. So, I mean, you have an education program for them. Do you get the sense that younger people are becoming more aware now of the benefits of water in the same way that it's like it's kind of been seen as an older women's kind of a thing? But are younger people coming now to you and saying, "Oh, I go for a daily swim," or "I have my dip with my friends," or?
It's not something that we've really encountered so much. I mean, you know, it's more that young people are very receptive, you know. That's the thing is, it's not something that I could say I've noticed. You know, we're generally going into these, going into classroom environments when it comes to the education programs, or else we're bringing them into the river, and, you know, we're interacting with them in those kind of settings. And it's more about awakening them to the wonder of water in its whole, you know, and bringing
something new for them, though, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends actually. But we were just recently working with Timoleague School, and nearly every single student interacts with the water in some way, like whether it's sailing or swimming or just many different water sports around there. You know, so it's like it's so different to going to a city school, you know, where they don't have that. They've only got the swimming pool, you know, and so that's why we love what we do, because it isn't just about our access to water, because we're constantly surrounded and interacting with water every single moment of every day, you know. So even though we bring the benefits to the young people of immersion in water, and those that have that luxury to jump in, you know it intrinsically, we're really bringing that whole thing of that we're benefiting the whole time from being around water, and the fact that your iPhone is made, you know, from 12,000 litres of water, you know. It's like a growing value and appreciation of it, you know, which is so important.
And Nuala, because I know that you wanted to touch a little bit on risk and safety, because that's a really big one of a bit of your research as well.
Yeah, for sure. Over the many years, we look at risk, and we look at, a lot of people say, I'm afraid of open water, I'm afraid of going into deep water, I'm afraid of being out there. But technically, a lot of people are afraid of self-rescue. So you're not technically afraid that you're in deep water, you're afraid if anything happens, you don't know how to exit from deep water. So I think it's really important to kind of reframe your fear. Because if you're a swimmer, there's no real reason that you should get into difficulty if nothing else happened. So I think education around risk is really important, because a lot of times the greatest risk is from yourself. If you have a group of 3 or 4 or 5 swimmers, if there's a group of people in the morning who come and meet, and I've spoken to triathlon clubs about this, it's really important to look at, see what does a rescue look like. So it's a really good experience, because oftentimes you get 4 or 5 people meeting together, but all 4 of them, nobody might have a plan in the unlikely event of an incident. And then if you arrive and you've been up all night, or you haven't had a good night, or you might have had kids, or, you know, screaming, or you might be panicked coming out the door and you're going to the beach just to get away from it all, you may not be present in the swim. And you can sometimes be a liability, because you may not be happy to present yourself as being, well, actually, I'm not 100% today, especially as you get into cold water. So I think extremes will keep you very honest. And the beautiful thing about the ice, and the beautiful thing about cold, especially water or temperature effects, under 10 degrees in particular, there's the biggest physiological changes in our body as a result of immersing ourselves in water under 10 degrees. And most of those are in response to your breathing. So if you can imagine, you have 2 responses to cold shock, and one of them is cardiovascular, which is your heart, and the other is your breathing, which is respiratory. And the cold shock passes in 1 to 3 minutes. But if you have an added stress attached to entering the water, then you don't get to control that breathing side of it, because you're already elevated. And sometimes if you mask the fact that you may not be 100%, you haven't presented well, and you just want to rock up and you want to be part of the group and you don't want to tell anyone about your problems, which you don't, nobody wants to listen. That preparation is vital. It's vital that the little group you're in, that somebody says, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to tuck into the centre today, and you always swim to the weakest link. So therefore, you plan your swim according to the group. You plan your swim according to, your own circumstances. You may adjust the route. You know your tides. You understand the risk, but a lot of time the risk is self-rescue. And I think it's really important that all comes back to who we are as people. Because if you think about the impact of cold shock, it increases your ventilation, it increases your respiration rate. That's that natural response to the water. You can quell it, but you still have your cardiac response. Now, if you had high blood pressure, I'm not the Grim Reaper here, but this is just physiological. But if you had high blood pressure and you had a really bad day and you present and you already know that you're hoodwinking the group and you're saying, hi, how are you? I've had a great day, and then suddenly you become a problem. It becomes a problem. So when people talk about, I'm afraid of going out there, a lot of times they just don't know who they are in that circumstance. And I think it's a really good, unpeeling exercise to see who you are in those moments. You train hard to play easy. So identifying risks, but also who you are in those moments. I think it's a very good team bonding group if you have 2 or 3 people. Just say, okay, this morning we're going to go out there to that boy and you're going to be in trouble, and how do I remove you from it? And what does that look like as a group? And those kind of things are really good, because there are people in the group who may be very quiet. They may not want to intervene with the group. They're just present on the group. They could be an absolute brilliant in those moments. And I think they're very good team building exercises as well. So knowing the risk, but also knowing you could be the risk is very important.
I did a little swim with the women in Reykjavik. It's on the podcast going back a while. As you do. I just happened to be passing, and they have a group there outside the city. And what they do beforehand is they all join hands in a circle, and they ask, how is everyone doing? Does anyone have anything they want to share? Anything negative that they're struggling with? And then you do a little dance to warm up. They never wear wetsuits, and you go in. Now the water that day was around 1 degree, I think. And you sing as you go in, like a Viking song. And but they say the singing regulates your breathing for you, so you don't have to think about it. And you hold hands going in, and you stay just for maybe 1 or 2 minutes because it's really cold, and you come back out again and you warm down with the dance. And it was just the most amazing, immersive, beautiful experience. And these are people who know what cold is. Yeah. So that was an amazing experience, and I learned a lot from them.
Yeah, I'll just throw in there as well, which is very interesting, because I find it very funny watching people go into the water. When you look at people, and it is cold, okay, it is a lot of times in the winter, but the screaming starts before they've gone cold. And you're they're there and something like, oh my God, it's freezing, but you're not wet yet. I don't get that concept. So sometimes there are people going into the water in winter and they're like, and I'm like, yay. And then you turn the farm upside down, and then next thing they're all going, yay, and say, ooh. Yeah. It's just a sound. But just on the physiological side of it, that actually is really bad for your body, that gas breathing, because it can trigger an arrhythmia. Okay. So, if you imagine anyone with a panic attack, you're always trying to regulate the breathing, just breathe through. So if you don't, sorry.
That's what happens.
But if you have a situation that gas breathing, that gas that's the problem. So therefore, that's why when you're going in, you regulate the breathing, because that controls the cold shock. Now, don't get me wrong, cold shock is real. It happens. However, just to touch on the thing earlier, is that there has been studies on, it was 2-3 years ago in the Lidos in London, that people who entered the water and walked in the water, swam in the water, were in the water for more than 1 to 2 to 3 minutes. It triggers the HDA proteins in the brain, and this actually reduces the inflammation in the brain of the contributory factors to dementia and Alzheimer's. And there is evidence of going in there, that cold shock. Now, it didn't impact the people who walked in the cold. It was the cold shock associated with enduring that breathing. So by breathing through the cold shock and actually enduring it, controlling the breathing, there is evidence now that this trigger group, that the proteins are triggering, and that is reducing the inflammation around the brain, which is the contributing factors. So I mean, there's so much there, and that's why when you come out, you feel sharp, because it is really focused. And the last thing, and I'll eventually give you back your mic, is that what I love about it is it brings your world down to this. And you know, this is why you're here. This moment, just to breathe and be present, that's why you're here. And it's because if you can't breathe, you can't swim.
Thank you very much. I think
it's an interesting point on the breathing, if it's okay.
Microphone.
I think that the breathing thing is fascinating, and one of the things that I'm just bringing it back now to teaching children how to swim, and so I teach different levels, but for example, when we have the youngest kids who are 4 to 5 and they're coming in and they can't even float at this stage really. I mean, everyone can float, but they can't swim at all. They have to have armbands on until they can put their face in the water and exhale bubbles through their nose. And I think that, just speaking to, I think what Nuala was just talking about the breathing, particularly with the cold shock, it's so important, is not just breathing in, but breathing out, and being able to kind of do that in a more regulated way in the water. So I mean, I find, for example, when I swim in the winter and it's cold, or any long swim in cold water, the first thing I do is like really slowly exhale into the cold water with your whole face in, and that really helps you to regulate and to acclimatize. But it also helps you to stop that shallow, panicky breathing, and that's true of deep water. That's not even necessarily cold. It's actually that whole thing of the panic response and hyperventilating is one of the most kind of dangerous things actually that can happen to you when you're in water. So that's one of the kind of really important safety things that you teach, particularly children, well, anyone, but children in particular at the very beginning.
Thank you.
And can I just add one thing?
I started it off.
No, and it's just on the point of the breathing, and that is why there is great kind of crossover, and they say, well, there's no absolute evidence. It's a contributing factor to the benefits of people who have dementia, depression and anxiety and stress. If you look at the triggers, they're identical. The elevation, the escalation, the breathing, the panic, all of that is exactly the same, but that is the consequence of cold shock. So being able to manage cold shock is exactly the triggers and the benefit, whatever you call it, that's what you would guide somebody through in the management of anxiety. So that's why people feel they go in there, and it is such a great feeling. It's because you're getting to control an environment that can sometimes be out of control. But just on the point of safety, as temperatures go down, so too does your ability to manage them. So you have swim failure, post-rescue collapse, and all of those things. So just because you're in the water and you feel great doesn't mean you are. So always remember, in the cold, in the winter time, as you become cold, your fingers and hands become less powerful because you're losing the power in the fact that they become cold. So you have what's called swim failure. And a lot of people get into difficulty by not being able to get back to shore. And that can happen because as your arms and legs, if you don't wear wetsuits, go under 27 degrees, which is very quickly, you lose 3% muscle power for every degree down after that. So if you imagine that you're trying to push the water, your power has dropped, same as you might be out walking and you might be able to use your fingers and stuff. So please remember, it's much better to stay in shallow, stay close to shore, but being in there for 25 minutes or 30 minutes in the depths of winter, people say to me, I feel fine. I'm no doubt, but so does a functioning alcoholic. So it is incredibly difficult to be able to ascertain your own. Hypothermia is insidious, it grows, it comes quickly, but also understanding that we're not designed to be in that medium. So always have your management plan for the exit. And just, enjoy every moment of it.
That's excellent advice. I'm just keeping a slight eye on the clock there because we said we'd be finished about 1:30, but I did also want to open it to the floor. And if anybody had a question for any of our guests today, now is the time. Now or never.
When you were swimming 4 or 5 hours a day, did you wear gloves?
No.
Just
No. And what temperatures would you? When we swam around Ireland in 2006, we were starting Donegal, circumnavigated the country, so average temperature 11, 12 degrees. But as time passed, like say when I trained for Lake Zurich in 2011, the qualifying swim was 6 hours to have done by June. So I was swimming maybe 4 hours, 5 hours in the month of maybe March, April, May. Yeah, but you know what? We don't have a swimming pool in Dingle, and if you add 3 hours in, no, but if you know, I mean, like if you look at it, it's needs must. It's like people out like training in the rain on the bikes. For me, it was really important. If you add 3.5 hours onto your day to try and get out to a swimming pool, you take the pain. Yeah. So you build up to it. It's understanding its impact. Yeah.
But I suppose you are very
Do you want to take the mic?
practiced at. You're very practiced at swimming for long periods of time in colder water. I mean, in the sense that someone, that's the thing, you do need to have a certain level of acclimatization before doing 6 hours, obviously. I suppose is the only.
Oh yeah, no, but the point being there is like you would have no reason to be in there for 6 hours if you weren't doing something.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean,
yes,
for anybody,
absolutely.
people say to me like, how long should I spend in the water? Like, who are you as a swimmer? You know, and this is the point. It's like you don't go in there just like to go for a 6 hour walk. I mean, if I was to ask me to swim for walk for 2 hours now, I'd like, oh, I'd have to bring my lunch. You know, so everything is relative.
Yeah, totally.
Have we another question from the floor? Anybody? Yes?
Nuala, I read your book, which was just incredible.
Thank you.
And I came to the literary festival down in Dingle last year, and you were talking and you were saying that you were taking time out to reflect and to heal. And so I'm just curious, is swimming still? I mean, do you have big aims again to do any of these big things that you did before?
It's an interesting thing. My relationship with swimming was different to a lot of other swimmers. I think very early on, I was in the game since 2000, 1990s, whatever. But it became very apparent to me very early on that I couldn't line up with other people. I didn't have the brownie points. You know, some of my peers had a lot of maybe backing. I didn't have that freedom. I had to work, I had to be home. You know, and I often say to people that a lot of people could have been me if they gave up when I gave up. And I was asked an interesting question while in an interview, just getting to this point, is like, what advice would I give to somebody, you know, who looked at me with envy? And I would say, well, maybe I look at others with envy. So I think when you look at achievement and where I went because I needed things from it. I mean, I found at a time, medals are €2, and trophies you can get engraved for free. You know, and it's where you place achievement. For me, leaving the house and getting out and seeing amazing things about life and stuff, that's why I went. You know, in 2011 and 12, you know, nobody was swimming 23 minutes at 0 degrees, you know, and everyone said to me, oh, you're crazy, the risks are too big. And it's like, but I thought it was possible. You know, so I trained a minute at a time up in the Pedder's Lake, and, you know, I pushed, I did 38 minutes at 3 degrees. But it wasn't so that somebody would tell me I was wonderful. It was because I thought, oh my God, look at the level of control, look at the power, look at everything I can do. And you know, you sign up for the Bering Strait, but you have to be able to let go into these conditions. So to be able to let go into these conditions, I need to be strong, but how do you get strong if you can't get control? So I sit down with a pen and paper and I was like, let's make Nuala great again. And that was my relationship with it. And it was strange because it wasn't a swim for me, it was a way of life. It was where I went, and I often think in calm water, you can see your reflection. You know, you can see your balance, you can see who you are. And my father would always say, like, never be weak in the eye of it. You know, so it always brought you to this sense of control and power and privilege of being there. And, you know, for me, you know, being in those environments and feeling, like, look at me, like looking up at this. I remember swimming off the Cork coast, looking up at, you know, even Galley Head and being out on the islands, like, look up who you are, look at you. And that was my relationship for a lot of years. Cape Horn broke me. 2016-17, I really felt that I had drifted into my grey. Social media was coming at speed. People were, you know, rocking on with all these amazing achievements, and I had run out of money. I don't know how to brownie points. My family were saying, you know, would you buy a hairbrush? Would you just tidy yourself up? Would you get your windows done? And suddenly life is a problem. And there comes a time where you can't defend the choice anymore. So I wrote the book primarily because, you know, I drifted into grey, in my own, like, where am I? Who's going to remember me? You know, and how am I going to be remembered? And I didn't want to be remembered for the swims. I wanted to be remembered because I was brilliant, because, you know, I pioneered, I took risks when people didn't. I drove hard into myself. And I want, you know, I just want my nieces and nephews, the next generation, same as I looked up at my generation ahead of me. And I would love to be thought of as being fabulous. You know, but we do, that's our job.
I think you are, Nuala, to be honest.
But you have to believe it.
Yes.
You have to see it. And like, you know, the next generation, I mean, if we don't give them something to look up at, like in the belly of the beast, in the eye of the storm, what do they lean into?
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, we curse pigs ears, but by God, do we look at their life now? And you know, I my father, my grandfather, and all these, you know, this is, but how do we grow a story now? So I kind of feel, for me, the swims was my journey. The same as people go to the mountains, you know, people, they beautiful poetry, they do art, you know, they write things. Everyone has their journey, but we all, every one of us, have a need to leave something behind that is our path. And I think for me, you know, I was going to go to Mount Everest to swim in a lake of 5,000 meters just to experience the altitude and the ice and see what that felt like. But that all comes back to breathing. It's interesting. And I just kind of feel at this stage, I would love to spend, I just want to appreciate myself, you know, for as much as that feels. You know, I don't think we, all of us, give ourselves credit for everything we've given up to be us. You know, people say it's tough being me. It's been insane being me. And, you know, you look back in your life, yeah, so that, I suppose at the moment, I'd love to do something in the future, but, you know, if you to do with Channel Swim now, it's 5,000, you know, and 10 hours, you know, 10 months of training. If you want to go anywhere, I'd love to go on a beautiful holiday. You know, and you know, but you know what I mean? It's kind of, years ago, none of that meant anything to me, but now, you know, when my periods were in Vienna, I had an immersion suit hanging off a coat rail, and, you know, so that was it. So I think at the moment in my future, I think where I am is this concept that I just really want to look at myself and think, wow, you know, you rock it, girl, and that's it. And that's, I think, what we all, every one of us, to be here at this moment, it has taken a lot of sacrifice. And I think to sit into that sacrifice every now and then and think, wow, I give all of that up to be here. And that's where we are, because it's the sum of the parts, yeah. So what lies in the future, I've just set up the Nuala Moore Appreciation Foundation. I'm only joking.
We have it up for you.
No, but it's not, but you shouldn't. You have to look inside. Like, I have no desire, you know, if people tell me I'm brilliant, that's great, but if I don't feel it, it's not it.
Yeah.
So you have to, yeah. For years, many newspapers would say, oh, she's phenomenal. I was hanging on by my fingertips. You know, so you have to tally that. So writing a book was very important for me because people described me as having all these phenomenal achievements. It cost me close to 60 grand. You know, and I've only got my windows and doors done recently. So no, but you know what I'm saying? There's a cost to everything.
I think that it's really important to I think that's really important to acknowledge, and that really comes out from your book, because I think there's a kind of and maybe it is connected to how certain sports figures have become such huge, big sort of icons. But sometimes there's this odd assumption that Roger Federer is just like has some sort of superhuman ability. You know, maybe he does, but I think what we need to kind of remember is actually exactly what you were just saying: the preparation, the time, and the sacrifice and the dedication that you need to actually, you know, you don't just rock up and swim a mile in freezing water. You spend months preparing.
But it's
for those
an awful
conditions.
lot is given up. Like those
Yes,
4 hours.
yeah.
4 hours of something else is given up. But it's for everybody. It
Yeah.
really is for everybody. And I think, you know, you get to a certain age and you think, God, I did all these things. But it's really important. In writing the book, you know, I appealed to why. Because I would go back and say, well, this happened, but tell me why, tell me how it happened. And I peeled it back, now the madness is brilliant. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know if I could go through that again. But at that time, like I was caring for my father as well, and you know, that was my respite. I got to control the pain, I got to go into the sea, because everything else is chaos, and that's, yeah. But at the same time, like, you know, we're all designed, I don't care what else, we're designed for brilliance. We're designed to succeed, we're built for that, you know, we're built for this.
Yeah, and thank you, Nuala, for sharing, you know, that positive voice that you have, or that you do when you break down, you also build yourself up again. You know, and you share that, and it's something that we all are inspired by. So thank you for your writing, because that is something that's going to keep on.
But people, like breaking and building is the most important thing. Like people look at weaknesses, and this is what I love about the ice. It exposes the weaknesses, you know, and it exposes you're tired, you're physical, you're all disease. It exposes it, and that's fine. You go home and you fix it. And I think, you know, I was like, what is stopping me? I always think, right, okay, if you can't breathe, you can't swim. So figure out how to breathe. And that could be pushing that to one side. So that's fine, and breathe through it. Because there are days you turn the key in the door and you can't breathe. There were days in the bank, in the queue, I couldn't breathe. I thought, the man is going to ask me for money. And it, you know, it is, life challenges you. And the sea has this amazing way, and the strength of the waves is in their perseverance. You know, just watching the way it's unapologetically colossal. And then it presents calm and we forget. And I think, you know, for us, like we're all passengers in time, we will all exit. The Grim Reaper speaks. We will all and our job is to leave behind what people should remember. We get to choose. And for me, I look back and, you know, okay, there's madness. But you know, there was courage, there was risk, there was bravery, there was humility. And times when the media described me as like, oh my God, she conquered this. I was in a ball at home under the stairs crying. So it's being able to tell your own narrative. And that's the whole thing. We didn't have psychologists. So breaking and building is just sit down, figure it out, and just, Kung Fu Panda, there's no charge for awesomeness.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Nuala. And I'm getting the wind-up sign there, because I know there's another event on at 3:30. But I just want to thank the three fantastic women who joined me today. I'm really humbled by all of your presence here, because three of you are just three individual women, so fantastic in your own rights. And thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone who came today. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you all again, and keep swimming and keep dipping. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Southern Stars from A to C podcast series. This episode was produced and presented by Southern Star editor Siobhán Cronin and edited by Tony O'Shaughnessy. For stories like this and more, visit southernstar.ie/podcasts, where you can swim through previous episodes with people like underwater cameraman Ken O'Sullivan, the men behind the Fastnet Swim, and the Swimming Women of Iceland. And be sure to pick up a copy of this Thursday's newspaper in shops across West Cork or online via southernstar.ie/subscribe. Please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. And thanks for listening.